This week on A to Z Running, Adam Homolka of Endurance Rehab joins us again to talk about some of the fascinating differences in treadmill technology and how to make use of them.
We answer a listener question about how to objectively measure fatigue and the need for adjusting training.
In the world of running, after 38 years, a woman finally finished the Barkley Marathons, and the photo, let alone the performance, is perfect.
Also, we share an interesting article about the relationship between nutrition and soreness.
All this and more on A to Z Running.
Welcome back to A to Z Running, where we help runners thrive with information, inspiration, and coaching and training services. I'm Andy.
And I'm Zach. And just a reminder that you can learn everything you need to know about our services at AtoZrunning.com, or follow us on the places you like to follow people on Instagram and YouTube and Spotify, among others.
Yeah.
And speaking of interesting things to follow, that's definitely something that's been on my mind a little bit lately. What are some of the other good sources of running stuff out there? And I encountered recently, I've been reading some of the works by Dr. Jason Karp. He has written extensively under the topic of running in all the categories. He's written about training. He's written about mindset. He's written about diet and nutrition. Like everything. He's really just written about everything in the sport. Clearly someone who has studied the sport for his entire life, it seems. But he was in a TED Talk back in 2022, and I stumbled upon it, and I realized that I had heard some of, at least, this TED Talk in the past and had just completely forgotten about it. But there were two things that he mentioned that I just thought, it's just really interesting stuff to think about. The one is we talk often about the connection between physical activity and brain health, and how you remember things better when you're running, and you can do creative things, at least inside your head, because you're not usually doing things literally creatively while you're running, but you seem to have a higher capacity for those things. Well, Dr. Karp reminds us of one of the reasons why that is not just a sense or perception, but is reality. In the TED Talk, I'll just quote him directly. He said, "Mice given regular access to a running wheel show more than twice the neurogenesis," which is new neurons forming in the brain, twice than those with no access. So that's obviously a mice study, but the point is, if we could study this thing, which we can actually see the direct connection between something in our brain and what our bodies are doing, and it's very, very good for us. And
That's
so
awesome.
It is awesome. It is. Now, Dr. Karp's whole point, his topic, which I just found to be really fun, was about how running is like this animal thing, and we need to be more animal-like sometimes with our physical activity. We need to run like an animal, I think, is part of his main point, which is kind of fun because we say specifically one of our major tenets is to strengthen the animal side of us in terms of trying to be better at the running thing in general, and that happens to be kind of his main point. But there's a concept he asserts, which I think this is just really profound, and so wanted to share this here. The rest of that was just kind of leading up to this point. He specifically states that for the general well-being aspect that running can enhance, one of the reasons he feels, and I think I agree, is that when we go for a run, we actually create a physical space between our problems in life and us, right? We kind of have a separation. And he's not suggesting that this is to just escape our problems. As a matter of fact, he doesn't spend a lot of time on the topic here, but he writes about it more. And I'm actually intending to read one of his books on mindset to read a little bit more about this. But he says one of the values of this is that space, coupled with what we know running does for our brains, allows us to be able to think about our problems and insert, in his words, greater clarity into that space. And I just think about that, and I think we talk about it all the time as runners, like it's a chance for me to think and reflect and or meditate and pray and all of those things, right? And insofar as that is true, it's also much more practical than that too, where it's like you take a step away from life for a bit, 30, 60, or 120 minutes or more, and in that time have the opportunity to contemplate those things while our brains are working at what might be considered the most optimal working that they do, at least in our day-to-day lives most of the time. So that's great. Now, my personal addition to his comment is what that allows for then is while we have that space to achieve greater clarity on our problems, we then have the opportunity very soon after that to re-engage with renewed confidence and clarity. And that is very important. And I gotta say, guys, I'm talking to you, married men, how many times have you gone for a run and got back and said to your wife, yeah, you were right, and I'm sorry? How many times? Anyone out there? I'm one, and it's been a number of them, and it should have been even more, and yeah, you're right, and I'm sorry. But we certainly have opportunities.
It's nice to hear.
To leverage.
It's nice to hear here on air as well. Ooh,
on air,
thanks.
So we have witnesses. But it's true. We see our problems through different light when we have a chance to step away from them, and we already know that the positives like the endorphins and some of the other hormone regulation that happens while running allows us to feel a little bit better about our problems too, and maybe make some better choices when we come back from that run. That's what I have to say about that. And you can guarantee we're going to be talking a little bit more about Dr. Jason Karp in the future as we dive into some of his works and share some of those insights with you on air.
Sounds interesting. I'm looking forward to hearing more. Now let's get on to your questions. This week we have a question from Craig, but before we get to it, I'd love to remind you that you can ask your questions by emailing us at questions@AtoZrunning.com. Again, that's questions@AtoZrunning.com.
Awesome.
Send them when you have them, anytime. You know, email's one of those things that's not going to ding on our phone in the middle of the night. We don't have it set up that way. We could, but we don't.
Are you worried about waking us up in the middle of the night with your emails?
Don't worry about it. Just send us your email when you think of it.
Also, if you have not ever become aware of the fact, Zach doesn't sleep. So you can send your questions all times of night, and chances are I'll get them and respond to them pretty quickly, or at least we'll see them. All right. Well, thank you, Craig, for asking. Speaking of, great question. Now, this question is actually fairly complex, and so I want to try to synthesize a bit. There's an extensive context here, and I want to try to make sense of it for you in concisely. So Craig wrote, from the context of what is best to maximize your training over the long term, not necessarily maximizing a run in the next day or so. I'm really not talking about physical injury. That's an important caveat, because if that were the case, that's a different question and a different answer. He writes, what are some good objective measures telling you that you should back off and take it easy or take an extra day of rest? So this is a difficult question, because what we're aiming for here is there something that I can do or see by the data that they could tell me something about what I should do as a result. So I'll get into a little bit more of what Craig wrote here so we understand the point. What I'm talking about here is like that tired feeling, or when your performance is just off and you're much slower than you normally would be. It feels like you may be wiped out or exhausted. So those are all kind of like these subjective measures. And then Craig goes on to say, one of the reasons he's asking is, he says, I believe the mind is very powerful and you can easily convince yourself that you need or should take a day off. But is that in fact what you should do just because you're feeling tired or fatigued or otherwise? And so then instead what he said here to clarify is objective indicators is the goal. Like, could you track your morning heart rate? And if it's raised by a certain percent, would that mean you should then potentially adjust what you're doing that day or back off or something? We already know that there are some indicators, connections between heart rate and imminent illness. When our immune system is acting at a higher level, then that tends to at like your resting heart rate especially is higher than it should be, that tends to indicate that something internally in our body is operating differently than it normally would. Oftentimes illness, but also in the similar sense, it can mean that that there's an increased amount of byproducts in our bloodstream, and so it's not as efficient as it would be. So there's some things there, and I appreciate that you asked the question that way, Craig, because you're hinting at what might be possible considerations. Okay, so let's get into some of our thoughts here. Ways to measure the need to adjust or go easy or take rest. That's the question. So morning heart rate is one of those things that people have talked about. And you could see, you go back and read through some of the works, like some of Ryan Hall's work on this topic especially. I think he was one of the earliest famous marathoners that was specifically writing about using heart rate in this capacity. Not that he was the first person to do it, but he was bringing a lot more attention to it. And he was saying for quite a long time, he would do things like, checking heart rate throughout the night and in the morning. And if it was, if the average resting heart rate overnight was a certain degree different, that would constitute some change in training. Many have suggested that that's a helpful consideration, but we have to remember that your heart rate is responding to a lot more than just physiological factors and indicators. And so, what did you eat before bed can influence your resting heart rate. Did you eat right before bed, which is another thing. Your level of hydration, and or like the climates that you're in and how adapted your body is to those climates. So there's a lot of considerations here, and I'm just kind of spouting off random things that might influence it. But the point is, the heart rate is not a perfect measure of physiological indicators. However, we also know that physiological needs are not the only thing that necessitates going easy. And so if I'm stressed out in general, my heart rate's going to reflect that, right? From like work or relationships or something, my heart rate's going to reflect that. But that also might mean, even though it's not got to do directly with my physical potential for performance, that might mean it would be a good idea to still back off, because that level of stress does affect my physiology in some sense. So those are all considerations, right? Another measure that you could use is something like blood pH, and this has been done. Many people have been talking about using it in training right now, which is like the lactate training, the double threshold lactate training, the Norwegian method, all the stuff that there's a lot of people doing things with this. But in principle, it's not terribly helpful for most of us because we don't have a blood pH testing kit on hand that you can just prick and test. Also, I don't really want to be pricking my finger every morning and getting a drop of blood on a strip to see what it's just not something I'm super keen on. But the point is, blood pH measures do indicate for you something that might desire adjustment, but it's only one of the indicators. And it would only generally happen as a result of certain kinds of stresses on the system. So if you stress your system enough to produce changes in your blood pH level that endure beyond like a brief time and during the workout or immediately after, then you're going to feel that in terms of like substantial soreness or substantial fatigue. Lowering blood pH levels takes high intensity work over long periods of time, like multiple repetitions that are really hard, things like that. So that could be helpful, but I don't think very many people are likely to do that, and I wouldn't suggest pursuing that as like the method.
If you're going to take a day off of running that was a scheduled day of running, I think it's good to ask yourself a question. That question being, what will I do if I'm not running with that time? Is it because, am I stressed out? Like, do I just not have the time in this day? Or am I feeling burnt out and I just need to rest? I think that if you were to substitute it with actual rest or like mobility or something like that, the production, the quality of that time is higher than if we were to sit, like do a doom scroll or like, not actually take the rest that might help rejuvenate that feeling of fatigue that we have. So I guess it's just good to be considering what we actually need and really thinking that through, because sometimes it's like, man, I'm so stressed. I can't even think of adding another thing to this day, but I do have the time allotted to go for my run. Sometimes I'll just tell myself, at least go out and do 30 minutes and see how you feel. If you're feeling a lot of fatigue, like you can go as slow as you want, just do 30 minutes, even if I have, 90 minutes on the schedule. Oftentimes I'll get into that run and I'll start feeling a lot better, but I like to give myself a chance to feel good. So I try.
So ultimately, to your question, Craig, you're looking for things that are unbiased measures. And unfortunately, there really has not been identified a simple, singular way to evaluate this. And if there were, someone would be making a ton of money on it right now. It's what's the
Whoop.
The Whoop thing. They've done a decent job of creating ways to objectively measure levels of need for recovery. I think that's worth pursuing. If you're really trying to explore all of the things that are out there and you haven't yet tried some of Whoop's technologies and how they incorporate the sensor with their recommendations, it's a consideration. They mostly rely on heart rate. I mean, let's be honest, they're not really using much else in terms of objective data that you can't already just use on your own and then create your own decisions based on it. But they have done a lot of the legwork of figuring out where are there some balances and levels that should mandate some adjustments. Now, that said, so there's some of those kinds of things out there. Whoop's not the only one. They're probably the best known. But beyond that, I also want to always encourage the consideration that while perceptions are biased, there are certain kinds of objective observations we can make that are not themselves biased until we make decisions about them. And that's things like, if I do something and it feels a certain way while I'm doing it, that is indicating something directly. And maybe I can't identify the exact degree without a little bit of bias. Then that's where that starts to get into like you were saying, I convinced myself that I definitely need rest because I'm just stressed out today. And so then I take the day off because I felt like I really needed it. But whatever the case is, before I make the decision, that feeling is some form of objective evidence. And now what we do is we say, okay, there are certain kinds of things and at certain moments when they become the most relevant. And that's where we suggest most of the time, it depends on the situation, but most of the time, the best thing to do is to start your warm-up and see how you're feeling when you get into your pre-run drills and activities. Because that's one, you take out the bias of, I really just don't want to go out the door right now. Take that part out of the equation and already get out the door and start doing your pre-run drills and activities. And then two, depending on if you do that stuff every day, which we suggest that everyone do, a simple pre-run routine every day to activate and warm up the body for a more optimal run experience. We happen to also have a pre-run routine that we specifically have built so that it can be time sensitive and efficient. Time sensitive is not quite the right thing. So that it's efficient for you before your run, so it doesn't take very long. You can, by the way, get that. It's free. Just go to AtoZrunning.com/free. And that routine, among and many others, do that. And depending on how you're feeling doing that, because you do it every day, how you feel normally. And then that's going to tell you, is it harder for me to get my legs to do a certain motion today? Like it's just really not as responsive as usual. Do I feel as snappy or as poppy as normal? Or do I feel like when I'm doing a lunge that it's more fatiguing to do the lunge today than normal? The actual single motion of the lunge. So like those kinds of things are going to create some pretty objective, relative to something, objective measures on their own. Now, it's not the same as hard data, but I would suggest that it's more reliable in these kinds of situations. And so then what you have to do is you just have to get really good, hone the mind, Craig, and everyone else listening, hone the mind. You have to get really good at making a decision with as little bias as possible. So you try to isolate the decision in terms of what is going on right now and how should I think about that in terms of my running goals and endeavors. And it's imperfect. But so, Craig, we didn't help you a ton with our answer here, but we kind of didn't on purpose. And also it's just a hard one to find an immediate answer to. But I encourage you to look at some of those other options because there are some things that could be helpful out there, and try it and see how it helps.
And let us know what you find out.
That's right. For everyone else, ask your questions by sending an email to questions@AtoZrunning.com. Anytime, as many times as you'd like. We'd love to feature them on air.
Now let's get on to the main topic. We welcome Adam Homolka back to the show. He is a MPT, ART, FMT, meaning he knows all the things, at endurance rehabilitation and athletics. He specializes in running and runners, of course. He has worked with Olympians, pros, and elites, and he sees runners in every situation, in every stage of running.
That is true. So we're going to be talking with Adam about treadmill stuff, a number of different things. Adam has all the stuff, all the equipment in his place, and he uses them with runners in many different ways. And so part of the interest in this conversation was tell us about some of the important ways that we can make use of these technologies, especially things around treadmills, something that runners tend to spend a lot of time on. Recently, we were talking about how it seems that we loathe to run in poor conditions when we've had a taste of good conditions. We don't like to go backwards. And so many of us find ourselves on the treadmill for less of a reason, less of a cause this time of year than we might when the cold months are just beginning or something like that. But whatever the case may be, this is an important conversation because there are some interesting things out there resource-wise. And if you've got access to some of this, it's even more fascinating to find out how does, things like a 0G treadmill. Adam has a Boost. Also, they have this new concept called micro G, which is largely the same concept in terms of the treadmills might be doing the same thing. But the point is that it's not necessarily zero gravity. So it's kind of an artificial claim. But anyway, we've got a whole lot to say about that, talking with Adam about the Boost and other technologies and how then we can make use of them. What are the situations where something like that would be valuable for a runner, and how would that look in implementation? We got all of that and more in a conversation with Adam. So let's get on to hear from Adam. Adam Homolka, welcome back to the show. We shared a little bit before we went on air here, showing people our conversation. We gave a little bit of kind of the background and the history as a reminder of our work with you over the years. And you've been on the podcast in the past, and you've shared some of your insights and expertise. But we're having you back on here, and I appreciate this opportunity and timing. And so before I get into why that is, thank you. Welcome back. Glad to have you with us again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on the podcast with you guys. Easy to talk and have a nice conversation and catch up.
That it is. It's like good old times. The only difference is we're not sitting on a table in your office. We're across the screen. But
that's right. You're lying down on a table. It's always a good thing.
Right. Yeah. When you can when you don't have to, that's a positive. Right. Mm-hmm. So that said, really just the opportunity here to lean on some of your thoughts on a particular topic. And I said a moment ago, it's timely in one sense because I was just talking with a number of our runners, as well as sharing some thoughts on the podcast, that this time of year is really interesting. So we're talking late winter, early spring, and runners have this tendency to, as soon as the weather starts getting warm, we start shedding layers and we get really excited about that. And then it gets cold again, and suddenly it's like absolute misery. Like, how could I possibly run in 30 degrees when I've been doing far worse than that all winter? But
Absolutely.
And so I've talked to people, and they're like, yeah, I'm just going to be on the treadmill again today. I'm like, why? It's nice out. But the reality is, we've got the equipment and we can leverage it and use it. And it leads to the thought of things are not all the same with treadmill technologies. And I wanted to be able to hear some of your thoughts in general to that effect, as well as then a specific conversation about some of the equipment that you have and use and leverage with your patients, as well as the athletes that can make use of those things in your offices. So thank you for being willing to do just that. Let's start with treadmills broadly. And if you're willing to just talk about, we've got kind of the typical treadmill with the belt, and then most people think that that's what we mean when we say treadmill, but there's a lot more out there. Give us a sense of what those things are. What else is out there?
Well, sure. Yeah, you've got your regular at-home treadmill. You've got the belt that runs underneath you. You move your legs just to make sure you don't fall down as the tread is moving underneath you. And then those come in various sizes, various speeds. Some can go up and get into a real big incline. Not all of them have that feature. Some of them can even go down and do some decline, so you can practice running on downhills. And with that being said as well, with those the vertical changes, you can also program in different runs. So if you want to go run, Heartbreak Hill at the Boston Marathon course, you can program that in on the GPS, and it can increase that vertical change for you, and then also kind of put you over the top and have you practice going on the downhill as well. So those are great ways to utilize some of the features of the belted treadmill. Then you also have what Woodway came out with is the curve treadmill, and that's non-motorized. So you are actually propelling the ground underneath you, and that's a bit more similar to actually running outside. Even though you're running in place, you're still utilizing your muscle patterns much more natural than you would be as you're running outside. Running on that belted treadmill that moves underneath you, you are still doing a running motion. However, you do end up using your muscle coordination quite differently. So it's really good for cardio, get your heart rate up, get your miles in, but you just have to understand that the muscle usage is quite different than if you were to be running outside. The nice thing about that curved treadmill that I discussed was you do get to use those muscle patterns, but because of how it's shaped and how it functions, you tend to have to do a little bit more of a faster paced run on that to keep the belt moving, and to keep yourself from just kind of stalling out. So I've liked seeing those with people who want to get on there to maybe work on some tempo runs, if they have to do some fartlek type workouts to where they really have to add some speed to it. Or it's just a great treadmill to jump on if you really want to just do sprinting on it. You can get on and do some actual strides on that treadmill, and then not feel like you have to push buttons all the time, and you can actually just use your leg strength to power through all that. So those are the couple more modern technology uses that we have with the technology or with the treadmills that we have right now.
I've been thinking about that curved treadmill a while, because I see some advertising pop up, and it fascinates me for that reason, because it sounds like it allows you to do what physiologically is a more natural thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm super skeptical, because in my mind it's like, okay, if I have to push for the belt to move at all, then I'm constantly like you said, I have to maintain that momentum, and so a higher effort or a higher pace might be necessary. And I just have not spent a moment of time actually looking into that in any depth. So I'm curious from your perspective then, Adam, with the technology as such as it is that natural? Is it a more natural experience, or is it unnatural in other ways than a belted treadmill? Or do you feel like that's a pretty solid option if a runner had an option?
Yes, when you use it the way that you just said, for those higher velocities and the bigger power efforts, it is really good. For sprinting, it's really good. Just getting those bigger strides, reaching out in front of you just a little bit further, still being able to land on your midfoot, so you're not pounding down on things. But the curve wouldn't necessarily be something that you'd want to try to pull off a Saturday long run on when you're just trying to plug in your miles and still run with your natural form. Okay. That's where it'd be just slightly limited in that sense.
And that so that constitutes then a kind of substantial difference in terms of you have now some treadmills that functionally can be a very different experience. There's other kinds of technologies then that account for some other features and advantages. And so with like the anti-gravity, or you just clued me in a moment ago to a new term that companies have used that I had not heard before, the microgravity. And so other equipment that allow us to then have a different experience with the treadmill. Talk to us a little bit about, technologically speaking, what those things are, what they're doing, why that is a good thing to have or to use sometimes.
Yeah, when we're looking at the microgravity and the anti-gravity treadmills, I'll probably end up sending you some video of it so that listeners who haven't seen one have a sense of what we're talking about here. But in essence, just to give you a visual picture, you are wearing some biker-looking shorts with a zipper on the top of them. You stand inside of a bubble, so then your lower half of your body is zipped into a bubble. That fills up with air pressure, and then you can adjust the air pressure within that bubble to offset the weight of your body. We do it for various reasons, and I'm sure we'll get into that here. But just for the sake of talking about the treadmill itself, we've got a couple anti-gravity or microgravity treadmills that are on the market right now. Boost being the newest one, and them just coming out with their Boost 2 feature after coming out with the original Boost 1. Ultra G was one of the first ones to break out onto the scene, which also has the bubble system involved. And then there's also a different kind of microgravity system that utilizes just a normal treadmill, and it's an adaptation, and that's called the lever runner. And that's kind of a small metal frame that you attach to your current treadmill, and then run with some bungee straps wrapped around you. So it's not necessarily as functional as the Ultra G or the Boost, but it is something that you can still unload maybe 20% of your body weight to give yourself a little extra recovery time, or to just ease back into running. And the Boost also kind of couples their treadmill with a Woodway. And so now you've got just the top of the line treadmill with a nice rubber, almost tank track surface that you're running on. So you get the impact decrease from the air pressure, lowering you down to earth faster, or I'm sorry, less quickly. And then also you get that nice surface of a rubber tread running underneath you. So also we get a little bit more of a cushioned land as you're striking the ground there. So those are the microgravity, anti-gravity systems that are out right now.
Talk to me a little bit more about that treadmill surface that they use with the. So it's like as opposed to the belt, which is just a continuous wrap around the rollers. This thing is like planks that because they don't bend. They're like thick and heavy duty. And it's clearly like a very, very different sensation when you're hitting that versus when you're hitting the belt. The belt has that deck that like has to give a little bit under you, so there's some shock absorption, so you're not just running on a flat piece of plywood all the time. And what do you gain by that? You said it's a little bit more like a softer surface then in that sense.
Yeah, there's a couple of advantages to that. Like you said, it's a softer surface. The planks run are probably maybe 18 to 20 inches wide, and then maybe about 3 to 4 inches, 18 to 20 inches long, about 3 or 4 inches wide. And then if you just envision a tank rolling right on through, that's the surface that you have rolling underneath you. Another feature that I like about that Woodway is that you don't get those sticking moments every once in a while. So you can get a belt running over, like you said, a nice slippery piece of plywood, and after time, you get wear down points on the underside of the belt. You get wear down points on the surface that belt is running on. And so, I'm sure people have experienced where they're just running, they're not really paying attention, and all of a sudden they kind of jolt. That belt gets stuck just for a moment as soon as you make that landing, and then it kind of throws you off a little bit. Hopefully no one's really fallen from doing that, but if you're not really paying attention and you're just going along, it is something that could potentially create some sort of injury, or just really throw you out of your rhythm. That tank track that Woodway has is just nice and smooth. I mean, there's no sticking. It's rolling. It's not rolling on top of anything other than just on the gears that are feeding its movement. So it's softer, it's more comfortable, it's less sticky, and it again takes away some of those ground reaction forces that earth and gravity like to pump through our legs as we're pounding on the treadmill. So it's just one more way to be a little bit more aware of minimizing your risk of injury if you have to run on a treadmill.
Right on. And I will just simply echo from personal experience, having spent time on your treadmills and having one in my own basement. It is a noticeable difference on those planks versus on a flat belt. That stickiness. So
Mm-hmm.
even if you've got a really well greased deck and no concerns at all about increased friction points yet, maybe it's like a newer product that hasn't worn down at
Mm-hmm.
all yet or something. Even then, I can still tell a difference. I go onto those planks, and that level of consistent smoothness underfoot is noticeable. That's really something. So on that note, Adam, you then mentioned that those functions of the anti or micro G equipment that allows for some other kinds of advantages. Then it's not just a different option for running on a treadmill. So talk to me one more time in general, and then let's get more specific. But what are those advantages? Why is it that you have a treadmill with that kind of a setup, and then have recommendations for athletes to use that versus just a regular treadmill?
Well, we're using the Boost treadmill currently, and it's at a point now to where, as you're dealing with all athletes, and even non-athletes, just people who are coming back from surgeries who might not necessarily be athletes, but they're active people. We've just found it's almost a piece of equipment that we really would have a hard time living without in our practice. Starting off with just, if we go to just an active person who's coming back from a hip surgery, a knee surgery, a foot surgery, just something that is limiting their movement. We've seen that it's just been great to get them into that system, take maybe 40, 50, 60% of their body weight off of their legs. So then their muscles, their joints, their bones, everything that's just been fixed and is still kind of raw and needing to heal, they don't have to work as hard. However, you can start to train normal movement patterns just simply in standing or walking. There have been times where I've even put people inside of that system just to do things like squats or lunges or just single leg balance, so that we don't necessarily even have to have that treadmill running, but we just want to be able to have some of those muscles start to respond and not go straight from non-weight bearing with crutches or in a wheelchair or a scooter of some sort, and then going straight to, all right, now you have to try to balance against full gravity after you haven't been doing that for 4 to 6 weeks. So in just a general orthopedic sense, it's a great way to ease somebody's trunk and lower body back into all of our normal functions that we don't even really think about. Balance, walking, and bending. And then another way that we're using it is, again, with athletes coming back from injury. And this could be anything like we're seeing, coming back from stress fractures, stress reactions, tendonitis, any sort of muscle tear, ankle sprains, all the things that are a little bit more traumatic. We can use the Boost to either keep them moving during that time that they are injured, or if they happen to really have to take some time off, some significant time off from being active and from running, now we can utilize that whole system again to ease their body back into full weight running against full weight gravity, so that it's just more comfortable. You don't get as sore from doing that. It's a nicer way to build on the strength that you're working on. And again, coming back from a non-weight bearing situation, you don't want to go from crutches to full gravity right away. You can, But now that we have the technology to help out with it, we know we can do that way more comfortable and make the outcomes a whole lot more successful by gradually grading in gravity into these very functional movement patterns. And then even if we take injury out of the situation, we've used the boost for helping runners modify their running form. Now, again, typically I'm not going to necessarily have anyone change their running form unless they've been injured with running. So there probably has been an injury in the past or recurring injuries in the past that require some sort of form change. But now we can utilize that unweighted system to really practice new running mechanics. And it's really nice because now you're practicing your running mechanics in a very safe environment. You don't have to worry about running on sidewalks while you're thinking about a different footfall or thinking about how your leg is acting behind you. You don't have to worry about crossing streets. You don't have to worry about cracks in the sidewalk. You don't have to worry about ice or snow that might be coming back around now in March. All these instances, you're in a very nice, encouraging environment to where now you can just focus on those form changes that we've been talking about, and the rest of the environment is safe and secure. And so we've utilized it in that instance as well, just to help that form change, again, be more comfortable and be more gradual, so that we decrease the risk of injury when we're modifying someone's form, because that's always kind of an issue. We can create more issues by changing someone's form. But then we can also kind of control it, and we can view you, we can watch you while you're on the treadmill and make sure that you are doing things correctly, and then have you just get back into normal running. And maybe we alternate back and forth like that, to where focus on one thing, whether it's your footfall for a couple minutes, get you back to your normal running so you can understand what your normal running feels like compared to your new form running, and just get that really good understanding so that your brain and your body can adapt to new form versus old form. And then one other way that we utilize it too is for, the high volume runners, the runners who are really training for that big marathon. People might be trying to run 60 to 100 miles while they're training for their marathons. And as you know, you get a little fatigued after you're putting in 70 to 80, 100-mile weeks, week in and week out. And so also utilizing the boost treadmill for just a percentage of your overall running miles during the week, as you get later into those training weeks for the marathon, you can still get your miles in, you can still run, you can still get your cardiovascular system up to par to where you want it to be. However, you're decreasing all of those shock waves from Earth that can really, really start to create some injury the more fatigued that you are, as that cumulative fatigue builds during your training cycle. So even just utilizing it as a way to, again, minimize the risk of becoming injured while you're building onto that big training cycle. So with that being said, we pretty much use it all day, every day, with most people who walk into our clinic and are needing to get stronger and get better at moving.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's exactly right. It's just, being an asset that is multifunctional, such as it is, it's in constant use. I love it. Well, let me kind of just react and summarize, because you're saying something here, Adams. You're describing this, and I'm thinking, my goodness, what a resource that this is, because fundamentally, we talk all the time in sport about the need to disentangle the various components, whether it's to diagnose a situation or to reinforce something. So I need to work on an area of weakness. How do I address that without necessarily compromising something else or risking or jeopardizing something else, right? There's a lot of considerations there. But to be able to say, okay, we can, in this situation, with the boost and the setup that we've got here, we can completely disentangle neuromuscular motion path factors. How are we moving, and the nature of what we need to change about our movement. Cardiovascular energy system factors. How can we stimulate the system in ways that don't require us to additionally stimulate our structural integrity in some sense. And so that, and then the third one is the structural integrity, because you can control that by changing your body weight. And so you have the option of saying we want more or less of that at any given time while we're working on these other things. That's really cool. What a great resource.
It is, and it's an investment to get into, but then when you realize one piece of machinery can really do, like you said, it can help out with any athlete at any time throughout any of their preparation for their event.
Right on. So just for the sake of clarity, then, quickly remind us your Boost treadmill, your specific product that you currently are using. Which one? You talked through a couple of different kinds of technologies earlier. Mm-hmm. What do you have in the office right now for your setup?
Well, right now I have the Boost 1. It was the first generation that Boost came out with. It's fantastic. It's reliable. It's easy to fix. I think I've only had to maybe do one update on a piece of equipment over the 4 years that I've had it. It was 4 bolts out, 4 bolts in, and we're back up and running in 20 minutes. So, but it's dependable, it's reliable. It was great, but then they found a way to make it even better. So now they just came out and they released the Boost 2. And for the most part, the integrity of the Boost 1 is still there. It's very reliable. It's got that wood weight treadmill. It's got the blower. They just made things just a little bit easier accessible in the event that something needs to be changed out. They made it a little bit more user-friendly with a few more buttons and fun things to play with. Made it a little bit easier to get into the system as well. So it's just a little bit less demanding to get into the new system. And I think they also kind of encased the blower motor a little bit more. So it's just it's quieter as well. So you don't necessarily have a big loud blower similar to kind of a smaller vacuum blowing compared to the Boost 1. So they found a way to make a really good piece of equipment a bit better without complicating things too much. They made it a bit better.
I love it. Mm-hmm. So when are they going to send me one so that I can have one in my basement? Yeah. Actually, it wouldn't fit in my basement. It'd have to go in my garage.
Right. Put it in the garage there. Yep. We'll get this podcast over to them. Maybe they can start sponsoring you.
Right on. Well, let me just let me kind of wrap it up by giving you a chance to talk about how people can have access to this. So the nature of the challenge is because this kind of equipment is not the kind of thing that people typically just have in their own house. For a number of reasons. One, because it's enormous. It just takes up a greater footprint. Most people don't have the space for that. But certainly, there's greater costs attached. So you have the opportunity for people to be able to benefit from this within your offices. What does that look like? Do people call you up and say, Adam, can I come use your treadmill, or is there more involved in that? What's the story here?
Yeah, we utilize it in a couple different ways. If it's if you are a current patient at Endurance and you need to use it, then we just roll it right into part of your treatment protocol. We do have people that are just in the community and they are feeling tired, and they can call us and they say, I want to get on there to, offset a few of my miles this week or next week, just until I can kind of catch up and feel a little bit more fresh. There's some people that call and are just like, what is this thing? I just want to try it, just see what it feels like to run with less body weight. So it's a nice flexible thing that we can do, whether you're a patient or you're just an athlete in the community that wants to use it. Like you said, you can call us up and buy a few sessions on the treadmill. If you're a patient and you want to try to learn how to run differently or move differently, we just turn it into part of your treatment plan when you're in physical therapy.
Awesome. That's really cool. That's cool. So there's options there, and as we always talk about as we're interacting with athletes, whenever there's a concern, there's something here that whether it's an injury concern or, as you say, there's something that I need to change about what I'm doing because it's been causing me issues. We always appreciate that you're a great asset to people, whatever the need in the spectrum, and you've been able to help so many runners in so many ways over the years. And all told, the equipment's good stuff, and it's a piece of the puzzle, but your expertise and what comes with that is incalculable value. So, Adam, as it were, I immensely appreciate your time here today, once again, coming on and being able to share some of those thoughts. And then, always how you have supported us specifically in our running efforts and AtoZrunning and the group and the running community at large in West Michigan. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for support in the sport, and certainly look forward to continuing more conversations in the future.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. It's my pleasure to be part of this running community in town. It's a nicer way that I get to enjoy watching people run and watching people compete without myself having to continuously go through all those miles and all that fatigue and all that sweat. A little bit easier for me to watch from the sidelines these days than it is for me to get out there and crank out all those miles as well. So I appreciate being part of this community and feel blessed to be involved with it as much as I am right now. So thanks for having me.
Kicking things off in the world of running, we have some AtoZrunner updates. Robert ran the Antarctica Marathon.
That's right. You heard that.
Yes.
Antarctica.
And he did a polar plunge, unrelated, but still awesome. Just shows that.
No, that's not awesome. That is not awesome. Robert, you are one of a kind. How about I go run a marathon in the coldest place on Earth and then jump in that water at the coldest place on Earth?
That's crazy and so cool. Kendra ran the Ridge Run, and she was first in her age group, as well as breaking the age group record for the 15K there.
Well done, Kendra.
Yes, way to go,
Very
Kendra.
impressive. We always like it to see record-breaking endeavors. That's just really exciting stuff.
And Michelle ran a half marathon in Owensboro. And said it was really fun, that it was a great energy, small race, but enjoyed it immensely. So
right on.
Congratulations, Michelle.
Congrats to all, and to the many others who are starting to run more events now that the weather's starting to improve, at least in these United States, among other places in similar regions in the world. But as it were, there's other people running things lately that are worth noting. So we're going to start with the Barkley Marathons.
It's exciting because the first woman ever finished the Barkley Marathons.
Laz mentioned 8 years ago that he did not think a woman was tough enough to finish this event.
Woo!
But
those are fighting words.
He followed it up by saying, but I am glad to stop saying that the moment someone proves me wrong. And so it's just a challenge. He was just really issuing a challenge. He's not trying to, it's egging them on more than anything else.
I don't know.
Laz is the founder of the event, by the way. He's the one who has been running it for 38 years now.
Yeah. This is a really interesting race. It's absolutely bizarre, really. It's a very different kind of race. It's considered to be one of the hardest races perhaps in the world, and it's in Tennessee, and it is grueling. In fact, it is not something you can quite prepare exactly for because the course is not guaranteed to be the same.
Yeah. A quick background, because we've talked about the event a little bit in the past, but just a reminder, because most people forget about this one from time to time. It's a really kind of a silly deal for a number of reasons. One, remember that like to enter the event, you don't pay like an entry fee. You have to like donate a random article of something. Remember that?
Yes.
So there's like weirdness around the entry piece of it. And also like even just finding out when it's going to be is kind of a little bit tricky. And then the race start time itself is not specific. And so you get like this, hey, it's going to start in like an hour at some point, and you have to just be ready for that whole hour. And then at some moment randomly in that time, the guy, Laz, is just going to light a cigarette. And that's the sign to start. As soon as he lights a cigarette, you got to go. Now, you don't know exactly when he's going to light the cigarette, so you all just kind of hang out And it looks like he might be. Nope, he's not. No, never mind. Oh, look, he's going to do it. So anyway, the point is, it's kind of a bit of a silly thing. But it has, for many reasons, as you might guess, has developed a kind of cult following because it is a very unique event and has a lot of, these sillinesses are also fun. And that's kind of the point. This is just kind of a fun ordeal. As a matter of fact, they call it a fun run if you don't complete the full 5 laps. It's just a fun run. Never mind that each lap is a marathon. Also, if you have not done one before, if this is your first time, they call you a virgin to the event, as you might guess. And then beyond that, it's been running for 38 years. And prior to 2024, only 17 people had ever actually completed the event. How many races, 38 years running, said, well, we've only ever had 17 finishers? Not so many.
And it's not just the grueling nature of the race, but it's also that you have to be good at orienteering because you have to find where you're supposed to go. There's not many people who are allowed or accepted into the race. And so, as you can imagine, you can't just follow people. You have to figure it out for yourself.
Yeah, they say there's a little bit of working together that happens in the first 4 laps, the first 4 marathons. And it's called the Barkley Marathons because you have to do 5 marathons. But they're not exactly a marathon. Who knows what the actual distance really is. Because you're not allowed to bring GPS with you either. No watches, folks. No watches. He gives you a watch at the start of the race. It's a dumb watch. And it's just for timing because you have to actually know whether you get back. Because there's a cutoff after each lap or at the start for the next. And so he gives you this map, which I think he hand draws, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure how the map is produced. He gives you a map, and then you have to find these pages from a book that correspond with your bib and bring them back. And that's how you actually complete a lap.
You have to proves that you actually did it.
Right. You actually got there because you found the pages. So what a thing, right? Oh, and by the way, the last lap, lap number 5, that's every man for himself. Anyone who actually makes it to the final lap, you're no longer allowed to work together with anyone else. You have to start at a different time in a different direction from everybody else. So
it's wild.
That's the thing that we're talking about when we say, oh, and it's 60,000 feet of climbing. And it's, you're not running on trails and roads. You're bushwhacking through brush and thorns and thickets on a mountain. That's Barkley Marathon.
Yeah. So let's get back to, now that we've set the stage for how epic this event is, the woman who was the first to ever complete this event, her name is Jasmine Paris, and she squeaked in. When you talk about getting down to the final bit in a race, this is what she did. She finished with 1 minute and 39 seconds to spare.
Wow.
And just collapsed over the finish line with pure fatigue and was her legs were oozing from scrapes on her legs.
Cuts all over the place from the thorns. And
just gave it everything she had. I watched an interview where she said that she was telling herself how she'd have to do it again. If she doesn't finish it, she's got to attempt it again because she's going to keep doing it until she completes it. This was her 3rd attempt and she did it. So part of what motivated her was she was I never want to do this again.
Yikes.
So we'll see. Maybe she'll have that forgetfulness we all have when we finish a hard thing and then we decide we want to do it again.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I don't think anyone should ever attempt this one again after experiencing it. But as it were, she did 2 fun runs and then she got serious and completed it.
Apparently.
That's how they say it. So Jasmine Paris, congrats on that. That's just incredible. And, certainly, clearly one of a kind, being the only one yet to have done so. Now, beyond her individual performance, which was exceptional, 4 men did also finish this year, marking the first year ever with 5 finishers, which is just an incredible, now going from 17 total ever to 22 in 1 year. That is really something. So one of those 5 should be noted is Jared Campbell, who just finished his fourth completion, which is the record. No one's ever done it more than that. In fact, prior to that, the record was 3, which was his record, and now he's upped it 4. Good thing, too, because behind him, John Kelly finished his 3rd. And so now Campbell has to keep going here if he wants to keep that record, because Kelly could just keep going himself. And there's quite a little bit of a rivalry happening here, it seems. Also, should be noted, beyond those 3, the other 2 who finished in that 5-finisher record-breaking year, one of them was a debutante, who they then call a virgin, as you recall, was Ihor Veris of Ukraine, who also won the event in his first ever, which is really impressive. But you remember Very's name because we've been talking about him specifically in the Backyard Ultras some months ago, where there was this crazy epic dueling going on for like the world record of Backyard Ultras. Remember, Backyard Ultras are a last man standing event. So you just keep going and going until someone gives up. Very's ended up 2nd in that one. He was bested there. So clearly this dude's tough. He can handle the backyards, last man standing stuff at world record capacity. Also can clearly handle what might be one of the toughest running races in the world. Yeah. And then Greg Hamilton was the other with, by the way, his first success in his 3rd attempt.
Wow. So these are some admirable people to keep after it with such a difficult race like this. That's pretty cool.
It could be said. Quick side note. Laz did mention, so we have to at least put some kind of asterisk here, that he did say, I don't know if it was a year ago or 2 years ago, but in the recent past, he changed the course to deliberately try to make it a little bit easier, more likely that we'd get some more finishers after, it was last year, because in 2022 there were absolutely no finishers. And it's like, that doesn't, people want to come and they want to finish the event. Maybe we'll see if we can find a course.
More exciting when people finish.
I don't know. But in 2023, there were more finishers. And then 2024, even more. And he made a comment. It might get a little tougher next year. All we have to say about that. But it also should be noted that weather helps a lot, because the weather can be highly unpredictable this time of year in that location.
Oh, muddy would be horrible.
Yeah. So like apparently this year, one of the challenges for people is that it was actually really hot, sunny and warm, like up to 80 degrees during the day, which is tough when you're doing 130 miles. So yes, there you go. That's Barkley Marathons 2024.
That was our biggest news piece, but we do have a couple things we want to talk about. Some odds and ends, you might say.
Odds and ends. Recall that we were sharing in the World Championships indoor track and field. The women's 800 was won by Tsige Duguma of Ethiopia, and it was like a really strange race, very, very slow, with just like a sudden burst in the end and a finishing kick. And we mentioned that Duguma has also run fast. She could win the race probably if it were a different type of race too. Well, she just proved that over again by winning the African Games in a blazing 157.73.
Yeah, that's fast.
So once again, we've got another name to watch out for in the women's 800 scene come Paris 2024, because that is a very competitive event right now in the world.
So that one is now the world leading time, right? Because
yes.
Last week you said that the youngster from New Zealand, was it?
I don't recall specifically. Okay. I think it was the Australian. But yes, this was the new world leading time, or as she said it, as the new world leading time, which it's not going to stand, because outdoor track season is really actually only just beginning for most parts of the world. But
so fast,
very fast, and now it should be noted, of the major threats to the 800 meters come the Olympics this summer, if they all end up at the games and healthy, all of the major contenders are from different countries.
So fun.
Which means that it's highly likely they'll all be there, because they don't have to compete against their own countrywomen for a spot, because there's multiple spots available. And so you're likely to see a Keely Hodgkinson and an Athingmo. Actually, I have no idea if she's even going to run anymore.
Athingmo?
She just keeps quitting running, apparently. But anyway,
I hope she does.
I think she's good. I think she's going to be. But you got their likes, and then you've got Mary Mora from Kenya, now Tsige Duguma from Ethiopia, and we shouldn't, discount the many other top tier 800 meter talent in the world.
So exciting.
So it is indeed that.
Now the World Championships coming up.
Cross country.
For cross country coming up this weekend, and we'll have the recap here. Just wanted to tease that a bit.
It's a fun one.
Yeah.
It's a fun one because you get a lot of the big names, but they don't always do well. And so it's cross country is hard. It's not the same thing as the track or the roads.
I'm excited to see Wayne Kaladi.
Is she repping USA?
I mean, she qualified for it. I guess I haven't looked at the start list.
We haven't looked at the start list yet, in part because
they change.
Well, it's like people are announcing last minute that they're not going to do it after all, like Sifan Hassan.
Well, I did see that. Sifan Hassan is not going to.
She bowed out.
She says she has other plans, which I always find intriguing.
No, that's not at all surprising. She is just coming off Tokyo Marathon, where she did not do well. And so clearly, for her, it's like, okay, I got to make sure that I'm prime and ready for this summer, for the big stuff. We also don't know for sure what she's doing this summer, whether she's focusing on longer stuff, shorter stuff, going to do it all, because she could. If there's anyone in the history of time who could, she's the one.
Yeah.
So, yes. Lastly, in our odds and ends here, random video from 1992 resurfaced, and we just wanted to mention it because it's just so strange. It's so strange.
Zach had me watch it, and I'm pretty sure I've seen it before, but it just shocks me every time.
Every time. So we've got a link to it here. It's just on YouTube, and if you can't find our links in our descriptions, then you just go and search it up and you'll find it, because it's 1992, the World Junior Championships, and I believe the 5,000 meters, and Haile Gebrselassie from Ethiopia was starting what would become one of the most dominant reigns in the sport of all time, was about to begin that here. Basically, this event kind of started it, and yet in winning the event, he outkicked very barely a Kenyan rival, and as he's passing him, the dude punched him in the back of the head.
He did.
Right at the end of the race.
Very aggressively.
Bam! Like while they were still running. They hadn't crossed the finish line yet. Punched him. Actually kind of punched him across the line. Like helped him.
Yeah, like pushed him towards the line, which is not very smart.
And you watch
but he's
this.
Also, like, that was so aggressive.
So aggressive. It's just so surprising.
Oh,
shocking, as Andy said.
It was shocking.
So you got to watch it. It's a little bit entertaining. And I think actually what made me laugh was not that it happened, because that actually doesn't make me laugh. That kind of is sad. But the way the announcers react to it. So this is 1992. Apparently, it doesn't faze them all that much. They actually think it's funny when it happens in real time. Don't really know how to react, but
I think they said something about him pushing across the finish line.
Yeah. It looks like it gave him a little shove, helped him out there. But what's more funny is that apparently the two of them are actually now friends. And so however things ended in the short term, in the long term, I guess it turned out fine between them. But
maybe Gebrselassie is just such a champ, like,
well, he is that.
Forgiveness.
He's a gentleman champion.
Well, finally, we have one more topic, and we teased it in the intro, but it's an interesting read about nutrition and soreness.
So apparently, I'm not going to be sarcastic right now. We already know that your nutrition helps you recover from running. And that's both your general nutrition overall and your specific refueling program after you finish a run or a workout, hard efforts, easy efforts, long efforts. So insofar as the effort is more taxing, these things become even more important. But we find that any kind of exercise that exceeds, just minimal efforts and minimal limits of time desire some amount of refueling. That's really important, because that's, what makes our body work. But what they find, as they're sharing in the article here, is that, of course, certain kinds of things have substantial benefits on recovery and reducing prolonged soreness versus other kinds of things. And so a quick reminder, because some of this is well known, and yet most of us benefit from hearing it again and thinking, oh yeah, I should be doing that. Mm-hmm. I should. All right, so here's what you got. We all know about the importance of carbohydrates and carbs after a workout, because that's the main fuel source that our body consumes primarily, and so we tend to be quite depleted after a run, especially hard or long efforts. So carbohydrate resynthesis tends to be most effective when the carbohydrates are simple carbs. And so that's where it's like, fruits and veggies are good after running, but, like fruits better than veggies, and sports drinks better than hard solids, things like that, in terms of like getting carbohydrates fast back into the system. But there are certain kinds of considerations here. So one being, it's not just like a heavy dose of, drink a Gatorade after you run and then you're solid. But they find that continuing the intake about every 2 hours for 4 to 6 hours is necessary to actually fully resynthesize, replenish, or resupply.
So a very long brunch.
Yeah, well, more specifically, just you don't have to cram so much all at once, but don't go too long before you eat more again. And that, keep that cadence up. What tends to happen for most of us is we finish a run like in the morning, and then we go about a normal day where, we might eat a little something after the run, and then we don't eat again until lunch, which is several hours later. And you've already broken the rule here. So smaller snackaging kinds of strategies are always better for recovering, because our body can't process loads of things all at once. It processes things slowly over time. So if we give it a good substance for a bit and then give it another good substance after a short while, an hour or two, that's going to be always better.
I just love that our audience will understand you, Zach, when you say snackaging.
Why wouldn't?
Because they're runners and they understand the process and the action of snacking. But it's a great word.
Would other people not know what
Maybe not.
Snackaging?
Maybe not.
Okay. Well, beyond that, you're familiar with the constant adage of protein and carbs in a certain ratio is the best thing, right? So remember, protein is necessary, not just carbohydrates, after exercise. One, because it helps with resynthesizing in terms of the carbohydrates, but also muscle protein synthesis is necessary as well for recovery. And so we need proteins for that too. But there are certain kinds of proteins that do that better than others. And they're the BCAAs, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, but those amino acids, those particular, the the chain amino acids in that instance come from things like dairy, meat, beans, and apparently tofu, which I wouldn't know anything about that, because
a lot of people do.
I thought tofu was like slime.
No.
But it's barely a protein? Okay, all right, good. Well, that's one of them. So these are the good proteins in terms of like the best kind of amino acids for the recovery factor.
There's also some drinks, but I can't do it.
Well, as it were, notably, drinks that use proteins that come from those sources are better than ones that don't. And so if you have a drink that's like a whey protein, which is a dairy origin protein source, that may be better than things like a soy protein, which is a bean origin, but it's not quite as effective, and it's also processed very differently. But either way, the wheys and the soys are not your best bet here. Go to the original source. Don't go to the things that were extracted from the things.
Eat some food.
Well, not necessarily just eat salads, but like milk is better than a whey protein substitute because of the level of processing that happens.
But you have to have more different things. That's why people do drinks.
Yeah.
To make sure that they hit all the markers of things that they need to.
Right.
That's why. Yeah.
So as it were, there's also a ratio of an amount of proteins and an amount of carbs that is the most effective. And you've seen this before because there's a lot of brands that have maximized this principle to say, we have the best recovery drink because we have the 4-to-1 ratio or 3-to-1 ratio. And then when you ask them, like, which one's better, then they claim theirs is better and the other one says the opposite. But it's somewhere between 3 and 4-to-1 carbs to proteins. If you measure it in grams, it's the easiest way to figure that out. And then you say to yourself, okay, so if I were to do this myself, which you can very easily, then just look at the quantities of things and say, okay, if I drink a Gatorade, for instance, how many grams of carbohydrates is that? And can you measure a Gatorade in grams of carbohydrates? I actually don't know. But the point is, then I figure out how much protein do I need
Eat a bagel
to account for that. So you get your ratios. That matters. Now, there's a lot more than just the carbs and proteins that helps our body with these recovery factors. And one of them, you could say it's like the king of the vitamins and minerals, if you will, is magnesium. And there are definitely things that we can do to get better and more magnesium than other things. So look for the magnesium-rich foods in addition to your carbs and your proteins, and you're going to find that much more benefit. And that includes, I mean, magnesium's not hard to come by. Pumpkin seeds, apparently, which I did not know. Avocado, which I did know. Nuts and beans. So you already see a trend here. Well, if I'm eating beans for protein and beans for magnesium, look at that. Lots of beans is good stuff. What did I say? Nuts and beans, rice, and apparently spinach. But spinach prepared in certain ways or not prepared in certain ways. Like if you cook spinach, it's no longer as effective a source of some of these things. Raw spinach.
You're supposed to.
What's that? Some of them you're supposed to, but cooked spinach depletes some of the things and not others. So it depends on what you're trying to get from it. All told, magnesium's good, but there are many others. So at this point, if you want to follow up, you can go to the article, read more about it. Published by Outside. And there's some interesting considerations here when we kind of just zoom all the way back out and say, I really should be intentional with these kinds of things. I should make sure that I don't wait 2 hours after I run before I eat anything. That's a bad habit. I should make sure that I don't just try to like eat a giant meal and then have 5 hours before I eat anything again, because it's harder for my body to process things in that way. So eat like a moderate meal, and then a couple hours later, eat another snack, and a couple hours later. And then look for the kinds of stuff that's the better quality sources of those things than others. Simple carbs and good protein sources are great. I don't want to just eat, a bag full of carrots. That's not really going to do it.
Good advice. Well, that's it. That's it for the show today. We'll be on again next week. So thank you all for joining us. It's been fun.